Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Genesis 40:23 is where I'm going to begin this morning. And I'm going to read this scripture and then kind of work a little bit differently. But it says this: Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. His chief cupbearer forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. I'm going to preach this message a little bit differently. I'm going to kind of take a different approach than maybe I normally would. Rather than giving you like 3 parts or some points to kind of follow or a sequence, I'm actually just going to kind of preach this in 4 parts. And I'm going to start with part 1, which is the feeling. The feeling. And I want to key into a scripture or a part of that verse that I just read, a phrase actually, and it says this. It says, forgot all about. Forgot all about. And I don't know what you think of when you think about being forgotten, but for me, it seems like very few things are more terrifying than being forgotten about. Very few things are more worrisome or kind of have a stranglehold on you than when you feel like you've been forgotten. For instance, go back to when you were a child, a young kid at school or an after-school program or some sort of activity, and someone was supposed to pick you up, mom, dad, family member, older sibling, and they just left you kind of lingering for a couple minutes too long. You remember that situation? You ever had that happen to you where you're hanging out and you're waiting and you're seeing your friends get picked up one by one, and you're still kind of waiting, thinking, okay, is someone coming? They know I'm here. I think they're here, or I think they know I'm here. And if it's a sibling, forget it. You just know like they've just completely abandoned you. But that feeling, the panic that sets in, right? Like for me, it was always my dad. If my mom said my dad was going to pick me up, I knew I was going to be forgotten about. I just knew my dad wouldn't show up on time. I knew he was going to have some reason or something. He'll bring something, like he'd bring me something awesome. But it was going to be late and it wasn't going to be on time. And there was always this worry in the back of my mind that when my dad showed up, I wasn't going to be, it was going to be because he forgot and then later remembered. But that feeling of being forgotten creates this sort of kind of worry and panic and fear and anxiety. And it's not just like when you're a child, it's when you're an adult, and it's when you're doing something meaningful, and it's when you're trying to accomplish something significant, which is why when you look throughout history, rulers and artists and kings and presidents and governments have done everything possible to sort of establish a way of recognizing and kind of never being forgotten, whether it's through statues or through writing or through taking over territory and trying to create some way to establish their authority or establish their longevity and say that this is going to guarantee or ensure that I'll never be forgotten. That my legacy, that my reputation, that our civilization, that our society, that this art, that this music, that this passion is going to live beyond me. It's going to be something that outlasts my lifetime. And even though I'm not here, I don't want to be forgotten. I don't want to kind of be lost in the shuffle or lost in the midst of all of this. And I guess the question that you'd have to ask yourself is why? Like, why does that matter so deeply to us? Why is there this intrinsic feeling of, I don't want to be forgotten. I don't want to be lost. I don't want people to miss out on me. I don't want to feel like I was just overlooked or bypassed or just kind of, as it said about Joseph, never given another thought about. And I think the reason is quite simple. It's because we are created for connection. And when someone remembers you, it validates the connection. It builds a bridge and says, yeah, you matter. You're significant, so much so that I cared to remember you. And when that bridge or when that connection is not there, we feel shame, we feel guilt, we feel worthless. We feel like maybe I'm not important enough for someone to care about me, for someone to hold on to my memory or my life or what matters to me. It's why we do these, like, let's be honest, we're gonna get real for a moment. It's why we do these pre-birthday posts on Instagram. Oh, it's the week before my birthday, just me hanging out. Like, it's me before my birthday, and we do like 6 of them because we don't want like anyone to miss out on the fact that our birthday is coming, because we want to feel remembered. We don't want to be forgotten. I remember a few years ago, speaking of this, people would write, happy birthday on Facebook. And I would respond to everyone, except for the people that just put HBD. I'm like, that's fake. The other stuff is real, but the HBD, if you can't even type it out, it's not meaningful. And Krista asked me, because I had one year, I responded to everyone. And she asked me, why'd you respond to everyone? So many people wrote, who cares? And I remember thinking, I care. I don't want to be forgotten. These people, decided to remember me. And it was so meaningful, not because of what they wrote, but it was what was meaningful wasn't the people who wrote, it was the fact that I wasn't forgotten. And I think that's something that we all feel. It's something that we all want and something we crave and desire, that we don't want that feeling of being or feeling forgotten. Or worse, that you're actually forgotten. And that's where Joseph found himself. In a situation, in a condition, in a moment where he was completely forgotten by everyone. That no one gave him another thought. And in that situation is where we pick up this morning in the story, which leads to this in Genesis chapter 40. We're going to go back. We start at the end of chapter 40, and now we're going to go back to the beginning. Verse 1 says this: sometime later, so Joseph, if you remember, was thrown into a prison. He was accused of assault. He was accused of rape by Potiphar, his boss's wife. And so he's thrown into this prison cell, into a dungeon cell. And in chapter 40, verse 1, it begins like this. It says, sometime later, after he's been thrown in prison, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and his chief baker offended their royal master. So Pharaoh became angry with these 2 officials, and he put them in the prison where Joseph was, in the palace of the captain of the guard. And they remained in prison for quite some time, and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. So this leads into part 2, the story. The story, because you have the feeling, right? The feeling is, this is what's happening. I feel forgotten. But you don't feel a certain way unless you have evidence, or what you believe is evidence, that reinforces that feeling, right? You don't feel happy unless you feel like, well, things are going good. Things are working in my favor. My job is going good. I'm getting paid well. I have great friends. I'm loving the life I'm living. And so I feel happy because of the supporting evidence. You also don't feel forgotten if everyone remembers everything that matters to you. But on the flip side, there's a story, there's a narrative that takes place, or a narrative that's created, and in that narrative, we then create a story that surrounds it. And in Joseph's case, there was a very real narrative, a very real story in which he's thrown into a prison unjustly and wrongfully accused, doesn't even have an opportunity to defend himself or plead his case. And he's thrown into this prison. And while he's in prison, he comes in contact with 2 guys who are right-hand people, or people who are very closely connected to the Pharaoh, the person who oversees all of the region that Joseph is currently living in. A person who potentially has an opportunity to connect Joseph with what he wants, which is freedom. And so he meets these two guys, cupbearer, he meets the baker, and they work in the palace. And whatever they did, we're not told what they did, but they did something wrong enough where the Pharaoh thought it was worth them going to prison. I don't know if they messed up a birthday cake. I don't know if they ruined his kid's party. I don't know what they did, but they did something where Pharaoh got mad and said they deserve to go into prison. And so they're thrown into this prison, and they're connected to Joseph. And Joseph is overseeing them. He's providing some sort of oversight and care for them. And in this process, Joseph builds a relationship with them. And as he goes through this relationship, he notices one day that something is wrong, that they're kind of disturbed by something. Well, at least one of the guys. And so he approaches the guy and says, hey, what's wrong? And so the guy tells him, well, I had this really weird dream and I can't make any sense of it. And so I don't know what to do. And then Joseph just thinks like, well, I can interpret that dream for you. I can give some insight. And so Joseph does, and it's a favorable dream. He says, here's what's going to happen. In 3 days' time, you're going to be reassigned back to your post. All is going to be forgiven, and you're going to get to stand right back where you were. No issue, no harm, no foul. So this other guy, the baker, thought, well, that guy had a good dream interpretation. I had a dream too. So Joseph, tell me about my dream. But his outcome wasn't as good. His outcome was, Joseph said, this is what your dream means. You're not going to get reestablished. In fact, you're going to get impaled and you're going to be killed for whatever wrong you did. You messed up that birthday cake. It's an unforgivable offense. You just can't play like that. And so he is going to pay the ultimate price and lose his life. But Joseph has a request that he makes. He says, listen, when you get out, remember how good I've been to you. Remember how I've treated you. Remember that I interpreted your dream. Remember that I'm here unjustly. You did something that deserves you being here, but I didn't. So when you get out, just tell somebody, let someone know, and maybe, just maybe, I can actually get what I wanted. I can actually move toward not just freedom, but ultimately reaching the purpose and the destiny that God has placed on my life. And so he communicates this. And in this story, what you find is that we read verse 23 where it says they completely forgot about him. You know, it's one thing to be forgotten about, but it's another thing to be forgotten about and pay the price for something that you don't deserve, and someone else gets recognition or credit, and someone else gets the benefit of what you do. You ever had a situation where maybe you worked really hard behind the scenes on a project at work, and you did something, and so for some reason your boss or superior or someone else says, oh, look, you know what, that's really awesome. Man, thank you so much for doing that. And you realize they're pointing the finger at the wrong person. And that person's like, oh, thanks, I worked really hard. And you're like, whoa, like, that's not how this is supposed to be. But you would be kind of petty, or it would seem kind of petty if you pull out the rug from underneath them and say, no, he didn't do that, I did that. So you just got to kind of shut up. But that's what Joseph did, except to a much more serious situation. It wasn't that he was just wrongly accused. It wasn't just that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't just that things weren't going right for him. It's that he did nothing to deserve that. And while he's doing his best effort, everyone else is catching the break. Everyone else is getting the freedom. Everyone else is experiencing the opportunity that Joseph himself deserves, but he didn't get. I just kind of read some of the language used around this. It's like verse 7 says this. It says about Joseph, it says, he goes to them. He cared about these people. He says, why do you look so worried today? So he had compassion. Even though he was in a bad circumstance, even though he was in an unfavorable situation, even though he didn't deserve to be treated the way he was treated, he still had mercy and compassion to say, hey, are you okay? Something wrong? Sometimes when you're treated unjustly, you don't care about how anyone else feels. You know what I mean? Is that okay? You're just nah, I don't care if you're okay. I'm not okay. But Joseph, that wasn't how he played. Hey, you don't look all right today. Is everything okay? And then verse 8, it says this about Joseph. He says, we both had dreams. So Joseph says, interpreting dreams is God's business, but go ahead, tell me your dreams. I'll do my best. So Joseph wasn't just compassionate and caring, but he actually thought, well, how can I help? How can I solve your dilemma? How can I make your situation better? How can I provide something that's going to be of value and meaning to you? And so Joseph goes and he goes above and beyond what his responsibility was. And you drop down to verse 14. It says this about Joseph. He said, after he interprets this, he says, and please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so that he might let me out of this place. You ever tell someone hey, I know this might be a reach, but if you could, if you could just put this resume in front of that person, if you could just let them know about my experience, if you can just kind of, hook me up with that item or that product, or if you could just kind of just listen, remember how good I've been to you. Remember how nice I've been. Remember how helpful, how friendly, how encouraging and supportive of your dreams I've been. So if you could, I'm not asking a lot, but if, when things go well for you, just remember me. Just remember that I was here for the journey. So please, when you get out, let the Pharaoh know about me. Verse 15, he says this, he goes on, he says, let the Pharaoh know. He said, please tell him. He says, for I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it. You see, Joseph wasn't just looking at this point in his life, at this point in his kind of season of where he was no longer really even focused on trying to reach his purpose. He just felt completely abandoned, completely forgotten. He was just desperate. Hey, I don't even belong in this part of the planet. I was kidnapped. I was taken from my home. I was just trying to care for some sheep. My dad told me to go tell my brothers that dinner was ready, and they threw me into a pit and sold me into slavery, and I've been dragged away from my homeland. I'm not even trying to become anything of any significance. I just want to go back home. You could almost hear the despair in his voice. I didn't do anything to be here. I don't deserve to be here. Can someone just send me back? Please, remember me. But they forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. And I think the fact of the matter is that Joseph held on to his belief. He held on to God. He said, God, I've trusted you. I've worked hard, but at this point, nothing has gone right. And so, about reaching, about significance. I'm supposed to be someone that does something special. I had this dream. I had this belief that this is what was going to pan out. And I told my brothers, I stepped out in faith and I spoke it to my family, and it all backfired. And now here I am stuck in a dungeon with no hope for release, with no hope for kind of freedom, let alone hope for achievement or hope for fulfillment. I'm just desperate to go back home where I was a nobody, where at least my dad liked me. And I think if we were honest, here's what I would say. If you were honest, and I don't need you to be honest with me. I don't need you to be honest with your neighbor. I just need you to be honest with yourself. I think we would all recognize that at times in life, we've come to this place where we felt that God has done us wrong. That we did everything right, or what we thought was right, or what we knew was right. And things didn't go as planned. And they didn't just go as planned, but in the midst of all of that, we were completely forgotten or completely missed, and no one ever seemed to care about what was happening in our lives. And you look around and you feel like, okay, God, you're recognizing that person, so-and-so's catching a break, this situation is happening, and all of a sudden, here I am, and I'm kind of flailing both my arms, saying, God, can I just go back to a normal life? I moved to that city. I took that step of faith in that career. I got into that relationship. I picked up and moved my family. I did the things that I thought I was supposed to do. And it didn't work out. Not only did it not work out, but worst of all, you forgot about me. You left me here to just kind of be here by myself and think about it on my own. And I think, if you were honest with yourself, you would come to a recognition that, there's been times in my life where that's how I felt, where that's what I've experienced, where that's been my frustration. This Jesus thing, this God thing, I do it because I'm supposed to, or I do it because it makes my parents happy, or I'm following because in a sense, I know it's the best thing, but part of my heart is just so wounded because I feel so forgotten, so abandoned by God. And I'm left here. My parents divorced, and they both loved Jesus, and they both loved God, and they both went to church, and for some reason, their marriage didn't work out. Yet all along, they kept saying, well, God's got us. And well, if God had got us, then why did they divorce? Why did they separate? Why did this have to be the, quote, best option? Or a family member passed away at a young age or an older age, and it just didn't make sense because, again, they didn't do anything to deserve how they passed. They didn't have to go through that. God could have intervened. Something could have happened. And for some reason, that person losing their life shook you to the core where you feel like God just completely forgot about everything we are. In fact, if I hear about one more cancer survivor, if I hear about one more story where someone had a miraculous vision or come back to life moment, then I'm going to be so angry, so disappointed because God didn't do that for us. Or maybe you thought, you know what, this relationship, this marriage, this situation, it's great, it's perfect, but something triggers something else, and so you end up losing what you really wanted, your passion, your dream for something, and you feel like in a sense you're settling not on the marriage or the relationship, but on life. And that what you want in love is contrary or opposed to what you want in life. And so you've got to give up one to have the other, and it can't be the best of both worlds. And so you feel inclined to just think, well, this is the way it is, and this is the best I have. And so at this stage in my life, I can't go anywhere from here. Other people can do it. Other people can get it. Other people can have it. Other people can reach what they believe, what they wanted, what they dreamed for. But me, I'm just here. God's just kind of left me here to deal with it on my own. Which leads to part 3, the prison. The prison. This is the space where you feel stuck, where you feel forgotten about, where you feel abandoned, where that feeling of being forgotten reveals itself in a reality of there's no way up, there's no way out, there's no way down. This is just what it is. And we don't just feel that we're in prison, but this is where those feelings of forgottenness kind of create like a disdain, a frustration, an anger, a resentment, a bitterness, maybe to God, maybe to people, maybe to yourself, maybe all of those things. And you just feel like I'm stuck here. There's no freedom because there's this, and like Joseph, there's this genuine sense of injustice that I didn't do anything to deserve this, God. I did what you were telling me to do. I took the step of faith. I moved to that city. I did all those things like we talked about. I've stepped forward. And yet, I've got 0 things to show for it. My dream didn't come to fruition. The goal didn't get accomplished. The frustration, last week we talked about detours. And it's not just that it's a detour, but it's done. There's no like, hey, go around this way. There's just a roadblock and I'm stuck. And I'm trapped here. And I was talking with a friend, about this very thing this week. I was FaceTiming with a friend catching up, and he's got a family, young kids, and he literally just made this significant decision to move by faith into like this whole new arena. And it was going to basically sacrifice a source of income for a period of time. It was going to sacrifice convenience of being near to family, all these different things that he believed in faith God had told him to do. And 6 months after kind of doing this whole thing, things started to at what first looked like things were going good, all of a sudden started to turn sour. And a year later, they lost essentially everything, living in suitcases. And so we were catching up this week. And this is back this summer where finally things started to turn a corner. And so I was talking with him, and he's like, man, I just remember I got so low, and I was telling God, I was like, God, I got out of the boat. I'm looking back at all these other Christians. I'm looking back at all my other friends. They're still in the boat, Jesus. I got out of the boat. I thought you called me to get out of the boat. And I was so angry because I was like, I had the faith. I had the belief. I did what you told me. And now I'm sinking. And God, being gracious as he is, said to him, I didn't tell you to get out of the boat. I told you to walk on water. Yeah. Okay, God. But you know what I'm saying? That feeling of like, God, I got out of the boat. Everyone else was scared. They stayed back. But I didn't. I stepped out. Even David wrote about this in Psalm 42, verse 9. He says this, oh my God, my rock, I cry, why have you forgotten me? Why? Why do I look around and see everyone else experiencing the best of life, getting to fulfill their dreams, live their best life, do all these things? hashtag YOLO, all these things that they love, and their Instagram is popping, and life is good, and they've got money and this, and they've got the relationship and the status and the career and the job and the opportunity and the stability and all those things. God, why have you forgotten me? Why? And maybe your prison is not your circumstance. Maybe you've gone through this series, you just thought, you know what? I get this, and it's important, and I'm going to hold on to it because this is really going to kind of help me maybe in a time in the future. And you feel like, honestly, life is good. I know what I'm supposed to do, and I'm working my way toward there. There's a path. Things are good. There's not detours yet, but I've worked around it. Life has gone kind of not as planned, but as best as I could imagine. And so things have been good. And so during this series of Reach, you've been like, okay, I'm trekking with you. I can cognitively understand it, but I don't necessarily feel like this burden of like I'm stuck or trapped or been forgotten by God. And if that's you, that's a great thing, because honestly, that's where I was till about 5:25 a.m. on Tuesday. In fact, I had a whole different message written at that point for today. And it was 5:25 on Tuesday. I was sitting at the incline bench of 24 Hour Sports Club. And I was getting a series of messages from some friends at 5:25 in the morning. And I remember reading one of the messages, and I had this kind of snarky response. I didn't text it back, but just in my spirit, I had like kind of this snarky, sarcastic response. And I was just sitting there, and I was like, well, why? That's not who I am. Like, that's not like what this person messaged is actually a good thing. So why did I have that kind of negative response? And so I was trying to think through that, because I try to self-evaluate and assess myself and my attitudes, and it didn't really make sense. And so I started to kind of look into it, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Well, first I was like, actually, I don't want to go there, God, it's too early. And he goes, no, we're going to go here. And he revealed to me that about 3 years ago, there was something that he spoke over my life that I felt like was significant for my destiny. And, it didn't come to fruition, at least not the way I thought, and still hasn't. And so I've buried it. And I've put it in a prison. So my life is not in a prison, but my dream is. Because I was too afraid to deal with the reality of failure, or not seeing this come to fruition, or not seeing it happen, or being let down one more time. And having to contemplate, okay, God, well, this, again, didn't work out, so why should I hang on to this thing? And at 5:25 on Tuesday, Holy Spirit, this is where we're going. I'm like, I don't want to go there. It's too early. I'm at the gym. This is about masculinity, not sensitivity. Man, I'm going to press this weight and move on with my life. And for the next 2 days, it just kept coming back. You stuck this thing in a prison. And I don't know if that's anyone else, where being a mom has overtaken a dream that you had for something else. Your job and the demands, those are good, and you've benefited from them, have suppressed something that you desired from a young age. Your calling, your ambition, the drive, the passion, the joy that you once had has been imprisoned because everything else around it has been okay or good. And so you just said, well, I don't know if I can feel this feeling. I don't know if I can hold on to this thing. I don't know if I can cherish this thing the way that I want to cherish it. And so I'm just going to lock it up and put it away, throw away the key. That way I never have to think about it. That way it never has to come out. That way I never have to deal with the letdown. That way I never have to contemplate if it doesn't happen. And so I can reach for other things in my life, but never reach the one thing that I really want. The one thing that God really spoke to me. The one thing that God really had for me. And this prison, this is where, on the journey to reaching, this is where dreams, where destinies, where ambition, where hope, this is where it all dies. And the reason it dies here is not because it's in prison, but because there's no timetable. Because there's no scheduled release date. Because you don't know when or if the answer is actually going to come. You see, Joseph was in this prison. We don't know exactly how long, but at a minimum 2 years and at a maximum 13 years. But regardless of whether or not he lived for 2 or 13, he was trapped with this reality that he had no idea when he would get out. There's a guy, he was a prisoner of war named Jim Stockdale, and he's written about in several books, but kind of the first book that really kind of talked about what his situation was like is a book called Good to Great, written by another guy named Jim Collins. And in this book, Jim Collins identifies what's called, or what's now known as the Stockdale paradox, because he was one of the longest surviving, if not the longest, over 7 years as a prisoner of war. And he made it while other people didn't. He got out, and other people who could have gotten out died before he ever was released. And so Jim Collins is asking him about this experience. So what happened? How come you were able to go through this? In fact, he asked him, was it easy to identify those who would make it and those who wouldn't? And he said, yeah, that was really easy. He said, well, we'll explain. He said, the ones we knew wouldn't make it were the ones that kept telling themselves, I'll be out by Thanksgiving. I'll be out by Christmas. I'll be out by Easter. I'll be out by my birthday. I'll be out by this. And he said the repeated failure of not being out by that time is what ultimately crushed their spirit, then crushed their being. But the ones who, and I'll kind of butcher this, but paraphrasing, said, the ones who were able to confront the brutal facts of their reality without losing hope for what they believed for in the future were the ones who were able to press through to the end and ultimately be released and experience freedom on the other side of this tenor. So those of us who trap our dreams in a prison, those of us who live in this prison, and this is why they die, is because we don't know when the release date is. Well, God, if I don't have this by Christmas, God, if I don't have this by the new year, if this job situation doesn't change in the next 6 months, if my family doesn't get better in the next 3 months, if my marriage, if my kids, if my life doesn't do this by X amount of time, God, then I'm done. And this is where destinies go to die. Which leads us to part 4, the final part, the choice. The choice. Because like Joseph, we have a choice. See, while in prison, Joseph had a choice. He didn't have freedom, but he had a choice. He had a choice to determine who he was going to be, what type of person he was going to become, what type of responses he would have when things didn't go as planned, when things didn't go right, when things still felt stuck, when he felt completely abandoned and forgotten by God. Like Mr. Stockdale, I'm sure he thought, you know what? No one is coming to my rescue. But he had a choice. Who would he be? And as I read to you, he chose to serve. He chose to have compassion. He chose to be a person that was of consideration. He chose to be a person of kindness. He chose to be a person that would serve and that would love despite the circumstances. You see, because while a circumstance or a situation or an unfavored moment can predict or can influence what you experience, it cannot influence or predict who you will become. You do that. How you respond to your circumstances, how you respond when you feel forgotten, who you become is completely up to you. Do those circumstances or situations have bearing? Absolutely. So it's not to minimize it or to reduce it or to say it doesn't affect you emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. But it cannot determine your will. It cannot impose you to be or not be something. And the reason this matters is because in these moments when we feel stuck in prison, we want to kind of like clam up and shut down. But Joseph, his response was to reach out. I might not be able to reach what I want, but I can reach out. There's people in my life. There's people I can love. There's people I can serve. There's people I can help. There's people I can be available to. And so I'm going to reach out if I can't reach up. I'm going to do what I can, what's available to me, whatever's within my reach is available for me to influence and to affect and to shape. And the reason that matters is because it always comes back in the end. Because Joseph didn't know when his release was going to come, but God did. And here's what happened in Joseph's case. Look at this in Genesis chapter 41. The very next chapter, okay, it's written, it says this: there was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison. This is the cupbearer, okay? So 2 years after the fact, the cupbearer speaking to Pharaoh, who has a dream, says there was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. And we told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant. Verse 13 and 14. And everything happened just as he had predicted. Verse 14 says, so Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. Now, there's an important lesson here, because in those moments where we feel stuck in prison, in those moments where we place that dream or that destiny in the prison, again, we want to shut down. We want to kind of become a recluse. We don't care about how any people feel because we feel forgotten. We feel unjustly imprisoned. We feel like things aren't done in proper accordance to what we want or what we believe. And so we just kind of shut down and ignore everything. But had Joseph not chosen to be the type of person that would serve, that would love, that would encourage, that would care, though it took 2 years, this circumstance, this situation would not have worked to his benefit. And I think we miss out on our dreams, we miss out on our destinies because we're not always aware that even though it may feel like God's not watching, someone is. You know, a few years ago, I got to work on a project with a friend of mine over the course of, it was the start of January, like 2016 for 3 months. And I started to work on this project with this guy. And he, great friend, good guy. We started to work on this project together. It took a couple months to put it together. Worked on the project, goes well, boom, move on. Never thought twice about it. You fast forward that, 6 months later, I'm in the middle of, kind of transitioning from South Carolina to New York, wondering how in the world I'm going to get, everything I need to be able to move to New York to start this very church. And, that season of 6 months, I'm like, the better I got on my resume, the less phone calls and email responses I got. The more kind of disciplined or honed in on what I could do or who I could, how I could help or where I could contribute for work and career, the less opportunities seemed to come my way. And then out of the blue one day, I'll never forget, it was about 10 o'clock or about 7 o'clock, on January 13th, a Friday, January 13th, I get a text message that says, hey, are you in New York yet? And I said, no, I'm still trying to get the right job or find a job or any job. And he says, well, let's jump on a call at 10 o'clock. I think I can help. And I get on the call with my friend, and it's actually the friend that I'd helped on this project 3 months or a year before for the 3-month period. And he says, hey, our head of product position is opening up in 2 months. And we haven't opened it. We haven't done anything for it. But immediately I just thought of you and wanted to see if you want to become our head of product. And I was like, yeah, 100%. I'll fly up next week. I can interview, do all this stuff. He's like, no, our team's worked with you already. They feel great about it. And so we'll start you next month. And here's what you need. Here's what we'll pay. Here's what we'll do for the moving expenses. It's all set. I'll shoot you an email. We had a 15-minute conversation. I'll shoot you an email and when we get off the phone with all the details. Like that. Job that wasn't open. Job I didn't apply for. Job that I probably would never have considered. But while I was stuck, while I felt like I was in this season of uncertainty, while I felt like things weren't clear, the path wasn't straight, while I was doing the type of things that I knew I could do by helping other people, by serving other people, mind you, the project I worked on, I wasn't paid for. It became my interview. And if there's anything that you should take away from this, it's this. Here's kind of the closing thought that I'll give you. What you do when you feel forgotten is how you will be remembered. What you do when you feel forgotten is how you will be remembered. When you feel forgotten, you're going to want to give up. You're going to want to shut down. You're going to just do my job. I don't care about who it helps, where it helps. Nothing worked out for me, or it didn't work out the way I wanted. So I'll just kind of, do what I'm supposed to do, and that's it. God obviously doesn't see it, so why would anyone else? But the fact of the matter is, what you do when you feel forgotten is exactly how you will be remembered. Because that speaks to something greater. That speaks to something more significant. It speaks to the something we'll wrap up the series with next week. So let me pray for us.